So just like a lot of Jamaican kids, I grew up going to church. And at church, I learned a lot of Bible stories. One of the Bible stories I learned was the story of Job. Job was described as a man of great wealth. He had the property, the wife, the children, the assets. The story goes on to say that he lost everything in a battle between God and the devil. He even lost his great health that he had, which, if you know anything from the last 2 years or 3 years now, great health is truly a blessing. But one thing that was sure about Job is that he never lost his faith. He kept holding on to faith in God. The story I'm about to tell you today is very similar to the story of Job, where this man lost everything, but he gained a great blessing. So if you know the song, It Is Well With My Soul. When peace like a river. Whoa. That song, It Is Well With My Soul, that was written by Horatio Spafford. The story behind that song was so interesting to me. I had to share it with you guys. It's a story that most people know, but if you don't know it, I'm going to tell you all about it today. So Horatio was born to parents Horatio Gates Spafford and Elizabeth Clark Hewitt Spafford in 1828 in the city of Chicago. His father was an author for the Gazetteer and his mother was a homemaker. Horatio Jr., that's the one that's the subject of this video, he became a lawyer in his later years, and he was also heavily involved in the Presbyterian Church. That is actually where he met his wife, Anna Spafford. Well, not Spafford at the time, but that's where he met his wife, Anna, because he was a Sunday school teacher and she was one of his students. So Anna now, she was originally from Norway and she moved to the United States as a young child. She was from like a different world from Horatio. In the years before she met Horatio, she had already experienced such great loss. She had lost her mother, she lost her father, and her younger brother to various illnesses. And she was a very brilliant girl. She was studying theology, math, and she was also studying liberal arts at the time that she caught his eye. And he asked her to marry him, but the thing is, after asking her hand in marriage, he realized that she was only 15 years old. So he couldn't marry her. She was not at the marrying age. He decided to send her to finishing school until she was 19, and that was a proper marrying age at the time. And they got married after she left finishing school. And by all accounts, it seems like they had lived a very comfortable, wealthy life. By this time, Horatio was an already successful senior lawyer who had also heavily invested in Chicago real estate. He was an elder in the church. And you know, back then, people loved having lots of kids, so they welcomed many kids very quickly into the marriage. And they had 4 daughters. Their names were Annie, Maggie, Bessie, and Tanita. They were living a very beautiful life, but you know how life goes. There's always some kind of conflict, something to mess up the beautiful story. So in the midst of their beautiful story, tragedy struck the family on October 8, 1871. And this came in the form of the Great Chicago Fire. And this fire, it destroyed 3.3 square miles of property, 2,000 acres of property destroyed. And remember, Horatio had heavily invested in Chicago real estate. So you can just imagine the immense loss that he experienced here. Along with the destruction of property, the fire also took 300 lives. Over 17,000 city buildings were destroyed, and this left countless amounts of Chicago residents homeless. Fortunately for the Spafford family, their household was not physically affected, but financially, they took a really great hit. Horatio's investment properties were among those that were destroyed, but fortunately for him, he also still had his law practice. After the fire, they opened their home to assist those who would need it. In the midst of this tragedy, Anna's health deteriorated and nobody could tell what was actually wrong with her. So the doctors recommended that the family take, a vacation to kind of get out of that area, a new beginning that would help Anna to get over this mysterious illness, because they still had no idea what was wrong with her. And this actually seemed to come right on time for the Spafford family. They decided to take a trip to Europe, and Horatio saw it as a chance to see his friend D.L. Moody, who would be preaching in Europe at the time. Unfortunately though, last minute Horatio got held up with business. He didn't make it on time. He didn't finish the business on time to travel with his family. And this was in the 1800s, so there weren't planes at the time. They were traveling by sea. They decided to board the SS Ville du Havre. I really don't know if I'm saying that right. To take them to Europe. But he felt confident, and he left his family in the hands of his fellow church ministers, because they were also boarding the ship, and he would meet up with them after. So Anna and her daughters left the New York harbor on November 15, 1873 on board for Paris. They were wealthy, so they were traveling in luxury, and at the time the SS Ville du Havre was a luxury ship. It was said to be able to carry or accommodate about 170 first class passengers, 100 second class passengers, and 50 third class passengers. At about 2 a.m. on November 22, the passengers aboard the ship were actually awakened by a loud crash and violent shaking. And unfortunately, it was discovered that the ship had collided with another ship called the Loch Earn. And by the time they discovered this, the SS Ville du Havre had almost split in two. So can you just imagine being on board a ship, hearing a loud crash in the middle of the sea, because they had been sailing now for a week. So they're in the middle of the ocean or the sea or wherever they would have been, only to find out that your safety net, this luxury ship that you were on board, that you felt so secure about just a few hours ago, was split in two. So I can just imagine how much the passengers and the crew and the captain were just panicking at this time. And the first thought would be, hey, we got lifeboats, let's go to the lifeboats. Would you believe that the lifeboats were actually painted to the deck of the ship? They couldn't move the boats because they were stuck to the ship because of how they were painted and dried on. When you're trying to survive, it's not the same you. The adrenaline kicks in. They were actually able to pry some of the lifeboats off of the deck and get into them. So now remember, Anna was on board with 4 young children. The oldest one was about 12 years old. And in the midst of this panicking now, she's realizing that my daughters, where are my daughters? Anna was trying really hard to save her daughters. But the sad reality is that she was the only one of the Spafford family that actually survived. And she only barely survived because the way she got onto a lifeboat was that they saw her unconsciously floating on another piece of board floating into the midst of the sea. And that's how they pulled her onto the lifeboard, which actually saved her life. And when she was conscious again, she was made aware of what had happened to her 4 daughters, and understandably, she was beyond distraught. She was almost at the point where it seemed as if she didn't want to go on. So on board their ship, there were 313 people. Only about 87 of them survived. Of the 87 that survived, only about 26 of those people were passengers. So majority of the persons saved were actually crew members. Anna could be heard after gathering herself saying that God had given her all 4 of her daughters, and he was ultimately the one who took them away. And she tried to console herself by saying that even though she didn't understand why this was happening to her now, God will help her to understand. So the survivors actually boarded an English vessel and they docked in England, where she was able to send her husband a message. And this was just the last message any husband and father would want to hear. Saved alone, what shall I do? Horatio immediately left Chicago and departed to meet his wife in England. So he then had to board a ship to meet his wife, and they ended up passing the same area where his children had perished. Probably I'm thinking about it as somebody who's alive in 2023. But why would you want to point out to somebody that, hey, your daughters are... That's actually wild. But they showed him the era where his daughters were said to have perished. And it said that in that very moment is when he penned the lyrics to the hymn we now know as It Is Well With My Soul. To write a song titled It Is Well With My Soul after losing all 4 of your kids, you'd have to have a very special experience or relationship with God, because it was not something, if we know the lyrics to the song, I'll probably put them up somewhere here, but like it wasn't something that he was blaming anybody. It wasn't, I can't believe this happened to me, which would be really what most of us would be feeling at the time. But he didn't write lyrics that stated anything like that. It was more, I don't know if it's giving thanks or just saying, listen, whatever God has planned for me, I don't know what it is, but he knows it all and I will be fine. So he originally wrote 3 verses and a chorus for this song, and later on another verse was added to it. And this verse was added by his daughter, because yes, they did eventually end up having more children after this tragedy. They ended up having, I think it was 2 or 3 more daughters. 2 daughters and a son, but their son ended up also dying from an illness. So they had 2 living children. And then they also adopted a son after moving to Jerusalem. And it might seem like I'm just springing on you that they moved to Jerusalem, but they did. Because in a wild, wild turn of events, after all this happened, they actually ended up becoming religious outcasts. Well, maybe not outcasts, they was described more as religious outsiders. And then that's when they ended up moving to Jerusalem and starting their own religious sect. They're the outsiders. If you guys want me to do a video on the outsiders, I think that would be a very interesting video on what happened to them, or what that group was about. Was it Christian? Was it something different? What were they doing? How did you feel about this story? Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed. If you're still here at this point, you are a real one. I can't describe you as anything but a real one, because this might be a long video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.